Hello everyone and welcome to episode 18 of the Layton Fitness podcast. Now in today's episode we're going to be discussing something under the name of reverse dieting. And if you're not already aware of what reverse dieting is, I'll give a quick introduction. All of you obviously know the main concept of a traditional dieting and or fat loss phase where we're focusing on reducing body fat. We're focusing on trying to maintain as much muscle mass as possible, and we're essentially slowly decreasing calories over time and or increasing expenditure via cardio over a period of time. The goal of the reverse diet is essentially once that individual has achieved their desired level of leanness, we're then going to slowly increase calories at a disproportionate rate to weight gain. So essentially we're trying to maintain that level of leanness they got to at the end of the diet, but at the same time we're now trying to increase calories to more of a sustainable level. So for the most part, depending on how lean they got, especially if they've been dieting for a long period of time, you're probably aware of the traditional yo-yo dieters where they'll lose a lot of weight and then they'll quickly put a lot of weight on purely because they're going from reducing their calories and then they're then adding a lot of calories back in immediately. Whereas the goal of the reverse diet is to essentially slowly, incrementally increase calories over a period of time. We're trying to maintain as much of that conditioning as possible, and then you should be in a position where you've maintained a lot of that conditioning, yet your food intake is at a much more sustainable level. Now, why is this a useful tool? This is a useful tool purely because it can allow individuals to essentially maintain a lot of their hard work during the fat loss dieting phase. It can also be an excellent tool to coincide this with a muscle building phase. So what I do with a lot of my clients, once they've achieved their fat loss goals, will slowly enter a reverse diet, and then simultaneously we'll also enter a muscle building phase because both feed each other, especially past the point where we've got that individual back to maintenance calories. We can slowly start going into an energy surplus. We can then have a training program a little bit more volume than the traditional fat loss program, and we can focus on gaining muscle but at the same time trying to maintain as much conditioning as possible. In addition to that, it can also be useful in the sense of trying to constantly try and increase calories over time, but try and keep your weight relatively stable to the point where you're eating a lot of food, you've got that similar level of conditioning, your strength will be much higher in the gym because you're eating more food. But more importantly than that, especially if you're a competitor, someone who competes relatively frequently, going from a dieting phase to a reverse diet, it can be very useful because that will therefore coincide with potentially your next fat loss phase. So you're slowly pushing the boundaries up to you're eating more food. When you then re-enter a fat loss phase, you're in a great starting position because now essentially you're able to eat a lot more food. Therefore, you've got more calories to play with during the next fat loss phase. This will help with maintaining strength in the gym. This will help with maintaining muscle because you're able to maintain strength better. You're generally in a much better starting position. This is another big benefit of the reverse diet. Now, will there still be fat gain during the reverse dieting period? And I think it's important just to know that yes, there will be, and the goal really is trying to minimize this as much as possible. So when I say you're trying to maintain as much conditioning as possible, it's not to say you're going to maintain all of it, especially if you get to say, for example, competition level of leanness. There's no way you can be comfortably walking around at 5% body fat all year round. It just doesn't happen. But at the same time, you can still maintain a lot of that level of conditioning in comparison to suddenly just going on a binge where you can get very fat very quickly. And it's also important to note the role of the reverse diet is really trying to understand this delicate phase after the fat loss phase where there's been a lot of physiological adaptations, your metabolic rate has dropped, things like leptin have dropped. You're almost in a position where you're primed to store body fat. So therefore understanding this, and instead of just chucking lots of calories back in immediately, which is going to result in fat gain, you're understanding this and essentially slowly increasing those calories to try and reverse some of these negative physiological adaptations. So how do we do this? How do we do this reverse diet? And it's first important to know this is somewhat of an art and a science, because similar to all of my other podcasts, everybody's different. Everyone will respond very differently to this. Some people, you'll find that you can, once the diet is finished, you can start adding calories back, and that can actually continue to lose body fat for 1 to 2 weeks. And these are really good responders, because that therefore means you can then increase calories once again. And it really is amazing seeing this. And you'll hear a lot about Eric Helms discussed this as well. He has some of his clients who actually eat up into a bodybuilding show, and that basically means he diets them down to a very, very low level of leanness, and then it'll slowly increase carbohydrates all the way up into the show. So essentially they get into a position when they come to showtime where they've maintained all that conditioning, yet they're significantly fuller, bigger. Obviously they can regain some of that strength perhaps that's been lost in the dieting phase. It's firstly important to note that at the end of the diet we really want to have just a couple of weeks on the same macronutrients and calories, just to essentially allow our metabolic rate to stabilise. So we don't want to go from, just say for example we finish on 150 grams of carbs and then just suddenly the next week we're on 250, 300. We need to almost have a couple of weeks, same macronutrients, calories, training, cardio the same, and then after that we can start making increments. And usually it really depends, but anywhere around 3% increase in calories from week to week is a good place to start, purely because we want to start with being very cautious, and then we can essentially edit this figure subject to the progress. So for example, if we had an individual where we finished the end of the diet, we increase calories by 3%, protein is going to stay relatively the same, and it's going to be mainly carbohydrates and fat, so it's going to be increasing probably slightly more on the carbohydrates, so probably be somewhere between a 3-to-1 ratio of carbs to fat. So for example, if it was 15 grams of carbs and 5 grams of fat, something along those lines. Again, it's not black and white, it really depends on that individual. But just say we do this, and then the following week they actually continue losing body fat, then we could increase this again. So perhaps we'll go to 20-25 grams of carbs, maybe 5 to 10 grams of fat again. And you can see that constant cycle, whereas just say for example that first week they actually gain too much body weight too quickly, we could either one, keep the same macros and calories for the next week, or we can drop them slowly. So again, it's a constant cycle, very similar to the fat loss phase, where you're putting something in place, you're measuring the progress, and then you're adapting it subject to that progress. So also, what about cardio? Again, you almost want to be doing this simultaneously, in the sense of you're slowly increasing calories, but at the same time you're slowly reducing cardio. And the same principle applies for cardio. You want to be very cautious initially, and then you almost want to get to a point where you've reduced this to 0 over several weeks and months, if this is coinciding with a muscle building phase, purely because when we're entering that phase we want to preserve as many calories as possible for that one goal of building muscle, gaining strength, and trying to preserve as many calories for that gym performance. So what about training? With regards to training, probably want to keep it relatively similar initially at the start of a reverse diet. However, for the most part, you can then transition to a higher volume routine relatively quickly at the start of the reverse diet. But it's probably going to stay relatively similar initially, and then you can transition to a higher volume routine. Okay, so conclusions and applications. My suggestion would be use reverse dieting. If you've been in a fat loss phase for an extended period of time, you want to firstly get to your desired level of leanness, then you want to slowly start this reverse dieting process. So the best way to look at it is almost the opposite of the fat loss phase. The fat loss phase are obviously slowly decreasing calories over time, increasing cardio. The reverse diet is exactly the opposite. You're trying to slowly increase calories, slowly reduce cardio over time. With the caveat, you're trying to be cautious initially. You can have a 2-week period of the same macronutrients, calories, cardio, so your metabolic rate stabilised. Then you start increasing calories by 3%. By 3% approximately, again, this isn't black and white, measure your progress, and then just say, for example, your weight stays the same, or it decreases, then increase that food intake again. If you gain weight, you can always draw that figure back. So again, you're constantly adapting those figures subject to the rate of weight gain or weight loss. Remember, there probably will be a small amount of fat gain, but you're essentially minimizing this by doing the reverse diet. Hopefully you found this useful. This really is a very useful concept, and I'm yet to see it fail with any of my personal training and coaching clients, just because it's a very slow and methodical process. And again, like I said, you're editing those figures subject to the individual. I'll look forward to speaking to you next week. If you're still yet to download my free ebook called How to Set Up a Nutrition Plan, if you go to James Layton, Layton Fitness.co.uk, you'll see a tab at the top of the page for a free ebook, and if you click on that, you can download that immediately. And that will essentially teach you how to set calories, macronutrients, so protein, carbohydrates, fats for your fat loss or muscle gain. And I'll teach you how to manipulate these figures to move closer to those various goals. If you'd like to learn more about me, again, go to James Layton, Layton Fitness.co.uk, and I've got over 100 videos on there, all of these back podcasts and lots of blog articles as well.